Welcome as we study this final chapter in the book of James. Two things we want to talk about in this final chapter: latter rain and living in luxury. We'll start out with latter rain as discussed by James in chapter 5, where he's encouraging the church to wait patiently for the Lord's coming, as God reminds us that he is waiting patiently for us to gather the precious fruit, his people. The early rain that James discussed possibly refers to the first outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon the church after Christ's ascension into heaven. And you can read more about that in the book of Acts. Also in chapter 1, verse 8, and chapter 2, verse 4 in the book of Acts. Latter rain. The latter rain is the final outpouring of the Holy Spirit before the harvest is reaped. And we, the church, Christ followers, are experiencing the latter rain now. As we move into the next section, living in luxury, particularly in verses 1 through 5, the author has some strong words of warning for the rich and powerful. In verse 4, James condemns how the rich he's addressing in this passage acquired their wealth by unfairly withholding wages from their workers. While it isn't the place to comment on what does and doesn't constitute fair pay, it is important for us as Christ followers to be cognizant of both overt and subtle abuses of power that might put us into the category of those James is condemning. Modern day examples of these abuses in pay might include misclassifying workers as contractors instead of employees, paying women and minorities less for doing the same job as others. In verse 4, James appears to be admonishing employers exclusively, but in verses 1, 2, 3, and 5, his words of warning is for anyone who is more privileged, powerful, and wealthy than someone else, sharply criticizing the hoarding of wealth as well as self-indulgence in living in luxury. The question of what constitutes luxury and overindulgence is a complex and personal one. But when reading these verses, it's important to keep in mind that James' chief concern in this passage, and much of the book of James, is the poor. So a good question to ask to discern whether or not we are the ones James is calling self-indulgent may be, does the way I spend my personal wealth and the profits of my business endeavors enhance or diminish the lives of the poor? And finally, as ambitious professionals, as many are, we would want to be wise to James's words in verses 2 and 3 and take those to heart, remembering that the wealth we accumulate in this life will fade away, but the acts of service we do unto others won't. And that is really the heart of the entire book of James. When you and I love our neighbors and our employees by doing our work exceptionally well, and when we focus on the needs of the powerless and the poor above our own careers, we are living more closely in line with the image of Christ, glorifying the Father and storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven. Thank you for stopping by, and thank you for studying the book of James with me. Be blessed and be a blessing to others.